Welcome to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. Industry updates and best practice to promote, support, develop and protect the Scottish red meat sector.
Hello and thank you very much for downloading this. I'm Mark Stephen. Right about now, scientists, politicians and campaigners from around the world will be making their way to Glasgow for COP26, the latest UN conference on climate change. The decisions they reach there will very likely have far-reaching implications for Scottish farmers. So in this QMS podcast, we're going to try and set the scene a little. To do that, I'm joined by two people. Laura Ryan is Chief Executive Officer of Lavenpark Consulting, which works with levy boards, government and commercial companies to improve industry insight and business development. She's also the Global Chair of Meat Business Women, which launched in 2015. Recently, Laura presented to the United Nations on the contribution meat business women makes to their global sustainable development goals. She also recently established the GMA, something called the Global Meat Alliance. Sarah Millar is the Director of Market Intelligence and External Affairs for QMS. After leaving school, Sarah worked in the family meat processing business, selling organic meat from the family farm all over central Scotland. Recently, she's been involved in a number of Scottish Government policy development initiatives, including the National Council of Rural Advisors, the Food and Farming Production Group, and the Suckler Beef Climate Change Implementation Board. Welcome to you both. Thanks very much for agreeing to do this. Laura, can I start with you? Tell me a wee bit more about Meat Business Women.
Yeah, of course. So I've got no agricultural background whatsoever. So when I listen to Sarah's journey, I'm always really inspired by it. I fell into the meat industry by total accident 20 years ago. Just when I finished uni, I was working for a meat and poultry wholesaler and thought marketing meat, that'll be easy. And how naive was I? So as my career progressed and became more senior, I noticed I was often the only woman in the room. And then when I would come back up north and chat to my mates on a weekend, they would say, marketing meat sounds awful. What are you doing that for? So I realised we had a pipeline and a reputation issue, particularly with women for the meat sector. So 6 years ago, I naively booked a room on my credit card in London and said to some of my contacts, would you like to come along and have a bit of a networking session? And we've grown phenomenally since then. We're now active in UK, Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, and then hopefully launching in Canada later this year. And we're an absolute mission with our now 26 corporate partners to inspire, network and grow the amount of female talent in the meat industry. I'm delighted to say we just earlier this month had our first face-to-face event in the UK for 2 years. So great to get seeing people again.
What do you think the particular problem is with, the perception of meat?
It's a great question, and you referenced in the intro my presentation at the UN. They challenged us quite hard on what are the numbers around women working in the meat industry, and to your question, what are the perceptions, what are the enablers and barriers? So this time last year, we launched a huge piece of independent research to understand that very point. And a couple of takeouts from there is role models, women, particularly young women leaving university, even an agricultural university. Unless they've got a family connection to the industry, they can't see any role models that look like them, people that look like them to inspire them. And there's still that external perception of the meat industry that it's farming and butchery, of which, of course, that's part of it, but we know that's not all of it. And it's a very tough manual physical job, which again, as we know, isn't necessarily the case. So we're on a huge mission with Meat Business Women to show the different jobs that exist and the different opportunities. So earlier this year, we launched the She Looks Like Me campaign, which we are now showing all the different jobs that exist through various videos across the year.
Sarah, was that something you were conscious of, age 16, leaving school and sort of going into the family business?
Thinking back, God, that seems like a long time ago now, Mark. I was always, brought up through young farmers, and the town that I come from in Biggar in South Lanarkshire, food and farming and the rural economy are really embedded into absolutely everything that you come from. So for me, there was almost no escaping it. But I came through a slightly different route, although I'd kind of grown up with, the butchers and working at farmers markets. When I left school and went to work there full time, I actually went back to university to study renewable technology and sustainability. So it was only about 5 years ago I came back into the red meat industry. So it's been a bit of a long way round for me as well. And I think what Laura said there really resonates, because actually although I went to work, for the family business when I left school, when I left university, there really wasn't a clear route into the red meat industry. I think if someone had told me what I now know, my career and my early career might have looked very different to what it actually was. Now you chalk some of that up to experience, and there's nothing that, I haven't done that I haven't been able to learn from. But I do think that having clear routes and clear role models could do a huge amount for making it easy for people to choose the red meat sector, because it's a fantastic sector to get into with a wide, varied day-to-day different areas, jobs, and I think there's so much more that could be done if we can attract the right talent.
And back to you, Laura. Tell me about Global Meat Alliance.
Of course, and you can feel a trend coming on here, can't you? I very much enjoy connecting people around the world, and I've been lucky enough to work with a colleague called Ashley Gray, who used to work for Beef and Lamb New Zealand and then Australian Pork, and who's based in Sydney. And we met at the World Meat Congress about 6 years ago now, and we just realised actually how, and rightly so, very nationalistic each of the levy boards and commercial companies are, but how much actually there's a gap in terms of creating a global narrative around the meat industry that everyone can then use as a foundation block, then they can differentiate on top of that. So we played around with the idea for a while, and then COVID, when that started, in sort of March 2020, we realised actually the meat industry globally needed to know what was going on and how that wave of the pandemic was affecting each country. So we then ran weekly calls for our stakeholder groups, sharing insight, information, best practice, and we've grown from there. So we've now got 16 commercial supporters, which is brilliant, be that levy boards like QMS and processors themselves. And we come together at least once a month to share insight, to share best practice, and do a monthly report, which basically tells everyone what's going on in the global meat industry. As part of that, we share insights and marketing materials. So if folks want to use any of that materials across their social media, they can. And I guess working with other organisations like the Global Dairy Platform, which has been around for 10 years, and seeing the amazing work that they do, their premise is we need to flood the zone. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for the global meat industry to do the same, to champion the great work that we're doing across the world. So that's very much our key mission.
See, I'm fascinated as to how this actually works, because from an outsider's perspective, I've got no real involvement with the meat industry at all. But from an outsider's perspective, it always seems to me that every area, every nationality basically markets on the basis of difference. Says, this is what we do, we're different, we're special, we are the producers of your particular meat, and our, very often they'll say that their welfare standards are higher than other parts of the world and so on. So if you're trying to get a global approach, how do you get past that? How do you get them to break that habit?
Yeah, and it's not easy. And I think there's still very much a place for that. And I'm a marketer by trade, so I very much champion the differentiation approach. But I think now, because and I know we're going to come on to talk about it shortly, the challenges that we're experiencing are across our whole industry. So be that about climate change, be that about sustainability, we need to have an aligned approach, and particularly some of the UN events. So I'm not saying we all need to be producing the same, but I know we definitely can learn from each other, and we can definitely talk about the benefits of eating meat and making sure consumers stay in the category, and then we can actively champion maybe the country of origin that we want them to buy.
You're quite rightly chasing me on. Let's talk about it now. Globally, what's happening in the red meat industry? What's the situation at the moment?
I think we're at a real crossroads in the global meat industry. I think, as we've alluded to, the sector is very fragmented. We've always been focused on our own production systems and not necessarily looking over the fence, and we've never really played that well together. I've noticed over the last 18 months, and hopefully GMA has been a positive in that, we've come together, and QMS have done an amazing job as well of working with other partners across the world to understand what is happening. So the first piece is the United Nations Food Systems Summit. And this was a huge event which took place in New York last month. And this is all for the very first time aligning food systems against the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Now, that sounds really complicated, and it is, but at the base level, it's really important the meat industry has a seat round the table. And I guess a year ago, we were tipped off by the dairy industry that we were maybe not round the table, and it's really important that we're represented. So that's one of the huge opportunities that the meat industry has come together. We've run global dialogues, so these have been pre-meetings talking about the opportunities for the sector, again, that QMS have been heavily involved in. So it gives us that intergovernmental exposure, really, because if we're not careful, at a really high political level, folks are making decisions about the meat industry that we're not influencing, and it's essential around the table.
Yeah, and I think just going back to Laura's earlier point, at a domestic level, we all have, different attributes that we can say about our red meat industries. And in Scotland, we're very proud of our natural production systems that work with our abundant rainfall and easy growing grass. And other parts of the world have their own production systems. But actually, the challenges that come at us, they're not differentiating between, Scottish beef and Scotch beef and beef from other parts or other protein sources from other parts of the world. So we need to have that overall narrative that red meat's good. It's as simple as that. And to do that in a pre-competitive way that we can then go on to further differentiate our products and build our domestic narrative. Because, like I said, the challenges that we have in Scotland are shared by every other red meat producing nation across the globe. And I think there's huge amounts that we can learn from one another and also build off one another as well. And particularly when we think about research and innovation, there's things that other countries are doing that we can build on, that we can then take and turn into a Scottish solution. So it's really about the power of collaboration and learning and sharing insight.
I'm assuming that this COP is particularly important. If so, why is it particularly important?
COP26 is coming to Glasgow in just a few weeks now. It is being heralded as a watershed moment in the global fight against climate change. So you'll all be familiar with we refer to the Paris Agreement, which is where there was a global commitment to reduce global warming at COP in Paris a few years ago. COP26 that's being held in Glasgow is being spoken about in that same light. So at the moment we talk about the Paris Agreement. In a few years' time, maybe it'll be the Glasgow Agreement we speak about in that regards. But COP26 is essentially a 2-week conference being held by the decision-making body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's a bit of a mouthful there. And essentially, it's 2 weeks where delegates such as heads of state, climate experts, negotiators, they come together to agree coordinated action around the globe to tackle climate change. So this is where decisions are made, and this will impact every part of our lives going forward.
Decisions have been made in all sorts of areas, as Sarah rightly points out, Laura. And one of those areas is the red meat industry. In the media, you can see a pretty well-organised campaign against red meat. Ahead of the conference, what's the industry been doing to counter that?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I guess that emphasises the importance of us all working together, because the folks that are negative about eating red meat are very well aligned and arguably very well funded as well. So with the GMA project, we've been coming together and producing not only information of what's coming up for COP, but also digital assets so folks can use them right across our social media and their own channels. It's probably also worth mentioning, because GMA is fully funded, anyone in the meat industry can use all of those resources. And I think that's something that's a bit unique. In the past, if you've been privileged enough to be on a certain group, then you'll be able to use that material, whereas we really want to be transparent and blow a hole open, really, in terms of flooding that zone and everyone accessing it. And I guess I won't take Sarah's glory, but in a way, we've also signposted to the Quality Meat Scotland activation kit, which does a fantastic job of talking about more local messaging and how important it is to work with that during the COP period. And to be brutally honest, I'm not 100% sure what COP will bring for the meat industry. You never know, and it's the same for the UN Food Systems Summit. how much detail will be discussed for food and how much for meat in particular. Will it be more about energy and that sort of thing? So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. But I guess one thing to watch, which I've noticed, is the retailers in particular. So you've got the likes of Sainsbury's, who are a principal partner of COP, making key statements around their meat sales and their sustainability strategies. Same with McDonald's as well. So I think we'll see quite a lot of the commercial companies wanting to make sure they're seen and are aligning to the COP goals.
That QMS kit that was referenced there just now, Sarah, who's it designed for and what's it aimed to do?
As part of the pre-COP26, we've taken a three-pronged approach to COP26. So just to go back a step, so we've been working with Laura and our global partners. Because we're on the ground in Scotland, we can provide a really important bridge between what the global red meat industry are doing and seeing and what's happening on the ground in Glasgow. So that's one strand of our activity, and making sure that we can link up the Global Meat Alliance's activation kit with on the ground activity. At a Scottish level, we've been working very closely with our Scottish Red Meat Resilience Group partners. So that's a collaborative body consisting of all the key membership organisations, NFUS, Scottish Craft Butchers, the Institute of Auctioneers and Appraisers Scotland, the Scottish Association of Young Farmers, the Pig Industry Leadership Group, the National Sheep Association and the Scottish Beef Association as well. So we all come together and have agreed to a number of different actions. So one of the key pieces that we'll be launching at COP26 is the Scottish Red Meat Industries. We're calling it putting our stake in the ground. Essentially, it's our first step in our route to net zero document. So we'll be a paper setting out our ambition and the timeline that we're going to go through over the next couple of years, and setting out the exact pathway that we'll be looking to take the Scottish red meat industry down to make sure we achieve net zero by 2045, which is the Scottish Government's goal. So at an industry level, that's certainly what we've been working on. We've also, our communications and marketing team, led by Leslie Cameron, our comms and marketing director, they have designed a full implementation plan of consumer-focused activity. So we will be going on TV. We've got an advert going on TV. We have full activation across all the retail outlets, as you normally would see with the QMS activity. So you'll see that coming online in the next couple of weeks. We've also got some what we're calling retail activation for butchers and other shops that they'll be able to display in their shops as well. And there's also going to be advertising in and around Glasgow. So looking at some of the key venues, we've secured advertising space to make sure that we can get our key messages about the role of Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork in front of the people who are in Glasgow as well. So really throwing everything at it to make sure that we can see the positives around the Scottish red meat industry. And the last prong to this piece of work as well is obviously we are in Scotland, but we have partners across the other areas of the UK, in England and in Wales. We've been working with AHDB and HCC on collaborative work, and that was where the activation kit came from. So essentially what we've done is the three levy boards have came together and pulled together some assets, so some downloadable infographics, some statements that really help us as advocates for the UK red meat industry to talk positively about the benefits of eating red meat, producing red meat, and essentially why we should be proud of the Scottish and UK red meat industry. So that all is within that activation kit, where each of the bodies, levy bodies, have also detailed the activity that they will be doing individually around COP. So really that's a tool for our stakeholders so that they can see what we're doing on behalf of them as well.
So those activation kits are not, they're not just aimed at, processing plants or farmers necessarily, it's butchers, anybody that's got some sort of stake in red meat production. You should be having a look at this activation kits and trying to get the message across as widely as you can.
Absolutely. And an activation kit is called Having Positive Conversations Around Red Meat. And that's really what we want to inspire. We want to normalise just having positive conversations around why we love red meat, why it's good for us, why it's good to produce it here in this country, so that it doesn't become, a big thing that we have to rush to defend the industry, because it's seen as a natural part of everyday conversations.
Laura, as a marketer, there are obviously lobbyists against the red meat industry. You can't ignore lobbying. You need an equal but opposite reaction to try and get your message across. How confident are you that you're actually going to be able to access decision makers at COP26?
It's a great question. And we've seen it right across this year, actually, to be honest with you, Mark. So UNFSS, there are some very well represented anti-meat folks heavily involved with that. And we may well experience the same of COP26. And I think this is back to the power of us being aligned as an industry globally does have a huge opportunity rather than being fragmented. And that's why it's great to have QMS on the ground as well and being so close to the event. I suppose we need to be careful as well that I think what the meat industry has a huge opportunity to do is just to be really clear on the facts. The UNFSS showed that we've got so many people around the world and also in this country that are hungry, and the meat industry has a huge opportunity to feed people with a high quality protein product. And we shouldn't be apologetic for that, and we should be more proactive, and which I know we're doing in pockets about championing that. So for me, I think it's about being factual and using the activation kits that QMS and GMA have put together, and all using them together, I think can be hugely powerful. I think politics is a very challenging space, and, you just need to read the press, particularly on a Sunday, which shows, that certain politicians have a real clear steer about what they think about red meat production as well. So we need to be making sure we're working with those people to be really clear on again, back to a fact-based approach, which I know the levy boards do a really good job of, and what we want to amplify globally.
And just to add on what Laura said there, some of the pre-COP26 work that we've been undertaking in Scotland has been focused specifically on our Scottish politicians. So we are 6 meetings into a 9-meeting, we'll call it a roadshow, where we have invited every member of Parliament, member of the Scottish Parliament and Scottish councillor out to a Scottish farm where we've got live examples of what farmers are doing on the ground to combat climate change and make space for nature. And that has been such a positive way to engage with them. We've had an overwhelming response, and we had 20 MSPs, MPs and councillors out on farm in the northeast just last Friday, asking questions. It's a real safe space, and we're kind of using it as that opportunity to, if you've got any questions around farming and food production that you've always wanted to ask, now is the right time to ask them. And the real purpose of that is to make sure that our domestic politicians have real live, local, tangible examples of positive production systems, that when these challenges come, whether it be from COP or other times, they've got a local example that they can relate back to. That's been a real key piece of work that we've been working on in the last few weeks.
And just to jump in, if I can, it's a hugely beneficial piece of work. And it's also interesting what some of the commercial players are doing as well. On the poultry side of things, I was chatting to a CEO last week of one of the major poultry producers in this country, and they were talking about actively getting some of these campaign groups into their plants to walk around and understand what it is they're actually doing. And they found actually some of these groups that would maybe do secretive filming on some of their farms haven't actually been legally into a poultry shed before. So by trying to be transparent, and maybe that's some of the next steps, not only to politicians, but some of the campaign groups and NGOs too, it helps give that fact-based approach as well, because I think that's one of the major challenges for the meat industry, be it about attracting talent or be it about dealing with big global conferences that we're heading up against. If people can't see it, they make up their own narrative, and that's why it's really important for us to really champion the narrative and be aligned on it.
You mentioned earlier, the UN Food System Summit in New York. I know a lot of people were actually concerned in the run-up to that what messages are going to be put across and what the consequence of that might be. What was your response to it? I mean, were you alarmed by it, or did you come away thinking, actually, there's some real opportunities here?
Yeah, we spent probably best part of 8 months working up towards that. And as I've alluded to, running dialogues, which were independent events to pull together science-based approaches and messages for industry. And we thought there was a pre-summit in July, and then the actual event, as you say, was last month. We thought there was going to be a lot of noise for the meat industry and probably a lot of targets coming off the back of it in terms of reducing meat consumption. But I was really pleasantly surprised by the balanced approach that's come out of the UNFSS. And as a result, there's been a call for a coalition of action. So that's basically different partners coming together around the world to continue to work together. So Sarah arranges a call for us, which includes working with the North American Meat Institute. They're about to launch a protein pact So historically, we would never have had insight in terms of what they were doing, but now we can see what that is, understand it, and see if it's something that we want to work with, or actually, at the very least, share it in a transparent way so we can all align. It feels very different. So even though the UNFSS was actually, I think, relatively neutral for the meat industry, it's changed the way that we communicate across the world, and we're a lot better at playing in that pre-competitive space now.
This is obviously, it's a very complicated field. There are a lot of angles you could take on this. But I mean, if you can summarise for me, what does the industry as a whole need to do right now?
It's a great question, and the reason it's a hard one to answer is that I understand how much pressure the industry is right through the supply chain. And spending time with processors last week, that they're telling me that actually this time is harder than it was a year ago when they were in the middle of COVID because of labour, HGV issues, shortages, be that CO2 or other things. So they're under immense pressure. So I don't want to put that to one side because that's important. But I think for me, my position has always been for the meat industry, make some time for the strategic. I think the meat industry is a great tactical player, and talking sort of generally here, but if there was something to fix and the meat industry needed to sort it, we can, because we have got fantastic people in our sector and we can move at pace and make stuff happen. What we don't always do well, because there's so much happening on a daily, weekly basis, is look at the strategic. So think, right, okay, after COP26, what's coming next? How do we need to strategically align? How do we need to have those long-term conversations? So that would be my position to the meat industry. I think sign up to GMA. As I say, it's free of charge. You get all the information accessed into your inbox. And also, if you can, even if it's just an hour a month, set some time up for where do you want to be in 12, 5 and 10 years' time. Otherwise, what we'll find is these intergovernmental bodies are doing it for us whilst we're busy dealing with supply chain issues and labour and all the rest of it.
Just going back to what I said earlier, having positive conversations, those of us who work in the red meat industry are all so passionate about the future and actually excited about the future. And kind of going back to what Laura said at the start, you have friends who don't work in the red meat industry or who don't work in farming, and they go, red meat, that must be a real slog. But actually, no, it's not. There's so much positive work that happens within the industry. It's really exciting seeing how sustainable farming and sustainable production is going to help shape our future. And I think as an industry, if we can all start talking that up a bit, that would go a long way in helping to make the industry attractive. What I would say though, just reflecting the industry, never mind the challenges that come from events like COP26 and the UN Food Systems Summit, we all know the EU exit and COVID-19 have been a real challenge for the red meat supply chain. And just last week and this week, we're seeing the impact of the severe labour shortages and what that might mean for consumers. And I think we have to marry that long-term ambition with the challenges that we are facing just now, because I know there's a lot of people under quite a bit of pressure and working in the sector, and I think it helps them as well. When we're all having a bad day, if we can all think about the positives as well. So I just want to make sure that point's in there as well.
Sarah Millar and Laura Ryan, thank you both very much for your time. It's been nice speaking to you.
No problem at all. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
This has been a QMS podcast. I hope you found it useful. I'm Mark Stephen, and thanks very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Quality Meat Scotland podcast. For news and to listen back to previous episodes of the podcast, visit qmscotland.co.uk. For Scotch beef, Scotch lamb and specially selected pork recipe videos and inspiration, visit www.scotchkitchen.com or follow Scotch Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram or Twitter.